Hi, welcome to Watcher DM. I'm Gabriel, and today I'm going to continue my series of kind of flip through and review of adventures that I've run. In this case, we're covering The Big Squirm, a Troika investigation adventure by Luke Gearing, produced by Malsonian Arts Council, with illustrations by Andrew Walter. First, right off the bat, I gotta say, the construction of this book is fantastic. Really, really nice ribbon, good case binding, stitch bound, and yeah, the quality of the cover material is not amazingly ideal, but it's about on par with other books in this class. Pretty much just like Bones Deep, just the other video. Anyway, The Big Squirm is a investigative adventure, and right up the bat, I'm gonna say this probably presented the biggest challenge in terms of running the adventure. To run an investigation, you kind of need the players to understand the nature of the crime in a way. First of all, in Troika, I think it's at this point it should be canon if it's not. There is no law but the Younggardi law. So like trial by combat just means that might makes right, and he with the biggest stick wins. Which means that laws are all pretty, just like whatever. They're pretty made up. So in this particular case, I think maybe because of that, they decided to go with a white collar style crime where the futures on a resource, scarf worms, were artificially inflated. The bubble burst when the scarf worms turned out to not be scarf worms and instead were pretender worms. And the party needs to, checks notes, figure out what the F is going on. And that's pretty much as much direction as you're going to get from this adventure. There are 8 interested parties, and there are agents. And the specifications for those are pretty, well described. They're, House of Peace and Love is an interested party. They have their stat block for the mob that they tend to appear as, the executor executioners. They have their goals, their methods, and their rewards. Unfortunately, goals tend to be things like kill all troublemakers, rabble rousers, and attendant pot stirrers. Or alternatively, resolve a root cause to stop the cropping up of such undesirables. That's the goal. What? I think the goals for most of these tend to be a little larger than the scope of the adventure can imagine achieving. So they're very fun, and they're kind of wild, and you can end up having a really good time, I think. Realistically, I guess what I'm saying is The Big Squirm is an amazing setting pretending to be an adventure. It is a subsection of Troika. Let's just go through the book here. I don't want to bore you with all the details right out of the gate. So there is a bit here about running the module right out the gate, and it does kind of try to break down a good way to run it. I didn't actually find this tremendously helpful in my playthrough. The one thing that I thought was kind of cool, the setup for it and the design, was how information is stored and retrieved. So because it's an investigation, you've got facts, you've got sources, and then you've got locations for kind of where those facts are acquired. So this is great. You can roll a d66 table here to generate that information. And then in the back, there is a chart of discoveries. And this is a diagram that you're intended to kind of fill out and connect the lines. Now, when I did this, I was trying to connect the lines on each roll. So I would roll for each of these 3 things. The problem with that is that I kept getting doubles on sources and doubles on locations. So the same source would have multiple pieces of information, same locations. So at some point, I stopped doing that and just used a straight across kind of rule. So there's a secret office in the Prodromus estate from Growliver Brist Theory Thief in short lease office and bed rental. Right. So cool concept. I think somewhat similar to some of the checklists in Bones Deep. I did find the concept compelling, and I found the rollable table here to be pretty neat. The facts are interesting. I don't know that I would call them necessarily useful. There was a lot of times where it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to tell them this, and they're going to have no idea what this means, because there's not a lot of context given here. That is kind of maybe a side effect of Troika, in that everything's a little outlandish, and probably the most painful part of running this adventure is the names of locations and people. We'll get to that. So, part 2 is investigators and agents. This section of the book just covers the different agents, or these are the other investigators that are kind of competing with the party to figure out what's going on. They're fun characters. They're really, really interesting. They're wild looking. Unfortunately, I did not have a lot of these come up in my game in ways that the party could interact with, and I'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the random encounters table and kind of how that works. The one that did kind of stick around for a while was Bug the Org, and he was about as uninteresting as the stat block here. Like, he is intended to be annoying to the point of the party wanting to ditch him. So you can imagine how well that went. Anyway, and then at the end here, after Lady Ismat, which I wish I had rolled the Lady Ismat. I should have just thrown her in. You've got kind of a random investigator generator. It's okay. Whatever. Interested parties. Again, this goes through the different kind of organizations within Troika who are interested in the outcome of this investigation. So the Youngardi House of Law, which I've mentioned, the House of Peace and Love, again I've mentioned, the Lodge Half Sinister Twistblade. So these both represent assassins guilds. One of the setups for this is that there's assassins everywhere. I had a really hard time making that feel present in this adventure, just because there's kind of also no real clear direction on like when you're supposed to spring an assassin. Like, are the assassins just supposed to start wiping out the party? What does that look like? The random encounters did not turn this into an assassin-filled adventure, I guess I should say. The crew of the floating autonomous zone orb, which I will talk about later. Again, another piece of the adventure that was largely left untouched by my party. The bank the bank 1082 stepped heaven. You see what I mean about the naming of things? This is fine, but also this is terrible. Like 1082 agent is just a mouthful to say over and over again if you have to. You end up kind of just calling it the bank, which is fine. Anyway, their goals. So this was kind of the interested party that my party had. And their goals are to understand the entire affair from beginning to end. Deliver a written report detailing this, cover up any discovered involvement between 1082 and the bubble, and identify additional profit opportunities. So this is probably the most straightforward investigative path for a party, which is kind of why I put the party in the bank at the beginning of the adventure so that they would kind of end up here. That said, I actually don't really know how this was achievable out of the book. Left Yellow Gang, they never showed up in my adventure. They look interesting. I don't know, they're wild. And the Prodromus family. This one's interesting because they are an interested party. They are a suspect in the whole thing. And quite possibly they are the culprit of the whole thing. They are also absent. So, like, their estate is here, but unless you go find where they've gone with their Narge Bowl golden barge, this is not gonna, they're just not gonna show up. So you have to deal mostly with their servants and staff. The Band of the Wandering Plume is another group interested only by virtue of the fact that they are culpable, and realistically, they also did not show up in our adventure, although they did come up in conversation. And then you've got probably the most confusing part of the adventure, the locations. So Downgate Arches is the kind of core location map, this map right here. And it's got a 2d6 encounters table. In theory, you are supposed to roll this when you move around between locations here. That isn't said anywhere, so, make it up as you go along, I guess. Should be fine. This art is awesome. This text is too small for human eyes to read, especially when you're trying to figure out where things are on a map that isn't in any kind of order. So, beautiful work that is unusable. I did my best, but I did end up kind of fumbling around over this map quite a bit. So that is something that I would have probably reconsidered before deploying. There's also a little bit of a disconnect here in that the key 1 through 12 here is for kind of the important locations. And then this key, A through P, are locations that are described in name only. They do not appear anywhere in the book. They are just names of places. And the only thing you can go on for what is here is what it looks like on the map and what it says it is here. That did not make this easier to run, especially with names like Office for the Restoration and Maintenance of Downgate Arches, or Our Noble Soul of Delayed Debt Collection Uncharitable Hospital. These names made me feel sick from exposure to British radiation. You shouldn't be allowed to name things. Ask an American, or literally anyone else. Prodromus Estate. This is a dungeon. This is a cool dungeon. We actually had a lot of fun in this dungeon. The design here is wild. The maps, again, beautiful, not super helpful in terms of understanding how things are connected. Fortunately, the actual areas, this breaks down the factions and profiles, which, cool. The pets and the staff are going against each other, and then there's the defense automatons. This was interesting and neat. The defense automatons are pretty lame in terms of running the actual adventure. They're non-lethal, so the party doesn't feel like there's any stakes when they're fighting them, but they have 3 armor, so they kind of take forever to beat up, which means that a fight against a bunch of defense automatons tends to be a bit of a slog, even in Troika terms. And Troika is fast for combat. It resolves very quickly. So this was not what I would have gone with personally if I was designing this for defense automatons. The best part of the defense automatons are the dopamine nets. I will just leave you with that idea. You get covered in a net, it makes you happy and docile. Genius. Best thing ever. So, the map assumes that you're coming in from the outside, from the top floor. 4. Domestic. This is not how my party entered, so I was doing this dungeon backwards, from floor 1, where the silver gondola. Yeah. So there's golden barges and there's silver gondolas. Yeah. And silver gondola docks is literally it's on the last page of the dungeon. So I started down here and kind of had to work my way backwards. Not that big of a deal, mostly because, as I pointed out, or as I was about to point out, each of the places has a clear indication right here in small text as to what other rooms it attaches to. More useful than the map, honestly. These were largely much easier to kind of grok. The downside is that they talk about the place, and then you're kind of looking for the title of the place. So a thing I probably would have done is just when describing a wide open passage leads to the Museum of Religious Art Acquisitions, a parenthesis and a number for which one of those locations it is maybe would have helped. In this case, obviously, it's 12, so it was the literal next one. But in some cases, that is not true, and it gets pretty wild. This dungeon has the wildest art in it. It is so good. The art in here was super fun. It was super fun to show the players. It was very evocative. And running this dungeon, ultimately, I would say, it took us 2 sessions to kind of get through it. And it was great. We had a blast. The party released all the animals who became sentient because of drugs. I don't think I need to go more into it than that. But yeah, this section of the adventure was kind of the piece de resistance. This was the star of the show. The floating autonomous zone orb never showed up. It showed up in the skies, but the party wasn't interested, and they never ended up engaging with it, which is too bad because it is another dungeon. The Scarform exchange hung there unused for the whole adventure. It is 1 page. It isn't that interesting, but it is a place if you want to kill your party to send them, because pretender worms are there. Again, we've got some great art with filing cabinets and pretender worms. The Silver Gondola Registry Authority is funny. It's kind of neat, but it's a half a page of text and a kind of pretty piece of art. This was super uninteresting in terms of how it actually played out, except that the party went here to get a silver gondola that they had kind of traded with somebody from the hotel. Speaking of the hotel, the Crane Neck Hotel. This is another dungeon in this adventure. So the Crane Neck Hotel is like I think it's 4 floors or 6 floors. I think it's 6 floors. Yeah. And each floor is themed, kind of. And they're all pretty slapdash, pretty crazy. They're fun. They're pretty fun. But they're not really... I did not experience my players running around and opening doors and meeting people on each floor. They pretty much had a destination and were heading for it. So they did not end up engaging too much. I did roll the encounters, so but they just didn't show up with that much interesting stuff. And then they got to the 6th floor, where they were supposed to meet their delegation. The way that this is described is a little bit strange in that the party went there to give information or like get kind of hooked up, but there were already investigators there waiting to give their information to the bank. But then the bank was kind of a bureaucratic nightmare that was basically incapable of collecting information because of protocol. And so eventually the party figured this out and was like, well, why don't you tell us your information? We're agents of the bank. And so they ended up getting some information from some of the nerds who were there, some of the other investigators that were there. It was okay. It worked all right. It did feel a little anticlimactic for them to kind of get up there and basically just not interact with the bank at all. But I think it was a funny kind of poke at the inanity of bureaucracy and artifice, which is good. They never touched either of these rooms, which was fine. They've got kind of a section here about the other estates. These are locations on the map that are in the keyed locations, so that kind of 1 through 12 list, but are not actually like very well spelled out. They're just this paragraph of text each. That's fine. I don't think my party went to any of these. They asked about them, and I was like, yeah, it's this. And they were like, cool, I don't need to go there. And I was like, yeah, pretty much. If you did, the book wouldn't support me, so, whatever. Left Yellow Gang hideout. I don't think anybody ever even saw that. Greenham Court. This was one of the last places the party went. This picture was super evocative. It was a lot of fun. They went into a hotel, into one of the apartments, and harassed a civilian, which was great. And I think they got the information they needed by finding a corpse that was in one of the apartments there. I won't spoil it and say anymore. You've got the bank. Again, we're looking at a 1-page description. They came in here a couple of times, and I had a bit more information stashed here than it says is here, just because I kind of wanted to move them along in the investigation. And then this was the part that kind of confused me the most. Part 5 is outside of Troika. So everything after this section in the book is places outside of Troika that you kind of need to go to figure out the rest of this adventure. Some of these are spheres. So the location of the Band of the Wandering Plume, they are in the Sibyllus the Spa Sphere, which has some great evocative art, very, very fun. Then there is the Sphere of Extralegal Sanctuary, current location of the Narge Ball. This is where the Prodromus family went. Again, party never went here. They did not know that this is where they went, so they never found the Narge Ball. That's the golden barge that was up for mortgage for the whole thing, which is kind of like a micro dungeon. I don't know. It's got some room descriptions of what's going on in there and a little dungeon map. And then this is kind of the penultimate fight, or the boss fight of the game. Was in the Grinning Zone, the Weaver's Hideout. This is a unregistered assassin or unlicensed assassin hiding out. It says outside of Troika, but this is like a wound in Troika, so whatever. Cool art. Fight was a little anticlimactic. She was kind of a cakewalk for my party. But that might have been down to me running it wrong, or the party just being a little over leveled. Air quotes leveled there pretty hard, since Troika doesn't really have levels. But that party had gone through Walgravik's Warehouse and Franz of Benevolence prior to going through this adventure. So that's kind of that way that went down. This section describes the silver gondolas. My party got the unprintable phallic, so we called it the silver dong, or the enormous dong, or something like that. We've got an unmarked map here, some more unmarked maps. Not that useful within the context of the book, but I was able to find these online and use them in a VTT. We played online. Again, chart of discoveries, great art in the back. Melsonian Arts Council really put a lot of love into this book and a lot of effort, and that shows. I think it's a cool setting, and I would probably run this again without the Scarforms. I would just skip the whole Scarform thing, put my own adventure inside of this setting, and use the NPCs and locations to house my own crazy shenanigans. I think the animal sentient plotline is better than the core plotline, honestly. And yeah, I think there's some other things you could really do with this adventure that stretch it and pull it into something a little more fun, at least for my table. Your mileage may vary. Anyway, that was my read-through and review of, or flip-through and review of The Big Squirm by Luke Gearing, another awesome book by Troika, or by the guys who make Troika. I would say, if you really want to be the collector, the consummate Troika collector, you probably want to get this. If your objective is to get a fun game at the table tonight that you're gonna, everybody's gonna get on board with and have a blast with, this ain't that. You're gonna want to really think through who's gonna play this with you and how you're gonna enjoy the evenings. It's probably 4 session minimum to run this, and yeah, how you're gonna make that enjoyable. As an investigation where the plot is a little unclear. Anyway, thanks for watching. Click buttons if you want to, or whatever. And yeah, if you want any of our Troika stuff, you can go check it out on watcherdm.com or other places RPG stuff is found. And yeah, that's what I got for you today. Thanks for playing.